Thanks very much indeed, Mark. And I said it's lovely to be back, and it's a much it's a much different campus, much nicer, I would hope. Certainly, than I was here many years ago. I'm delighted for the invitation. Thank you very much indeed. And just to give different perspectives. You come from different countries around the world, and you'll have different perspectives. And the thing that just struck me, just listening to the last discussion about exceptionalism, everybody has their exceptionalism, of course, and that rightfully the point was made that each country has their own perspective on things. And one of the things I want to do today is to share a little bit. Not so much focus directly kind of on, Ukraine, what's going on there, but a little bit about our background, where we came from in terms of conflict resolution, because we had a terrible conflict in Northern Ireland which went on for 30 years. So just to give you an idea and a perspective where we came from and where we sit in the European Union today, and the value of the European Union, of course, in that process in terms of the peace process which we started on. And it's fair to say we had many failed attempts. We were trying to get the peace process moving for quite a number of years, and then eventually the talk started seriously in 1996, leading to a peace agreement in 1998. Of course, there are huge kind of landmark dates right across Europe, and the 9th of November 1989. Is the one, of course, which you're looking at within that context, when the Berlin Wall came down. And just to mention as an aside, and I'll look at this a little bit later on, is that when one of the issues which arose straight away was how would unification take place, reunification within a European context, or what way was it going to be managed? We had a particular perspective on this given our own history, and our objective is ultimately about national unification. So we were holding the presidency of the European Union at that stage. So we actually chaired the European Council in Dublin in April 1990, which decided that reunification would take place within a European context. In other words, East Germany rejoining West Germany automatically becomes part of the European Union. And interestingly, after the Brexit referendum, as an aside, one of the issues we looked at, and one of the issues which we got the European Council to agree was, should there ever be unification, and should there be unification on the island of Ireland, that Northern Ireland automatically becomes part of the European Union, and that in a sense is building a bridge from German reunification into Irish unification in the future. I don't want to make it a history about, a lecture about Irish history or anything like that, but just say that there's a few kind of salient points when you're looking at cultural diplomacy, when you're looking at bringing people together, and you're looking at trying to achieve peace agreements. Ireland was occupied by Britain for 800 years, and we had lots of rebellions along the way, and they all failed. But the most salient one is 1916, the Easter Rising in 1916, and that in a sense, thanks very much. That in a sense opened the road to Irish independence. There was a war with Britain, and then there was a peace agreement in 1922. And out of 1922, you have the creation of two states. You have the creation of Ireland with 26 counties. And then the northeastern corner became Northern Ireland because the population up there were strongly unionist and wanted to remain part of the United Kingdom. Coming down a little bit forward, so that's just where the state comes from. And then we had from 1922 until 1973. We had various points along the road. We remained neutral in the Second World War. We became involved in a trade dispute with Britain, which was our largest partner. And reflecting back on it, maybe it's not the best idea in the world to get involved with a trade dispute with your biggest trading partner, but we did. And then you roll forward to 1973, and we were clear that we wanted to join the then European Communities, which is today's European Union. But we couldn't join for quite a number of years because the French vetoed the UK joining. And we took the view because at that stage, when we joined in 1973, over 70% of our trade went to Britain. So therefore, we took the view that we couldn't really join by ourselves. We had to go in when Britain went in. So then roll forward 1973, we actually joined, January 73. We had a referendum in May 72, and we just remembered the 50th anniversary of this earlier in the year. 83% of the population voted to join the European communities. And then we joined on the 1st of January 73. We're actually 50 years a member now in a few weeks' time. What did Europe mean for us? Because if you look at peace projects, and peace is ultimately what cultural diplomacy is about, I think that the biggest peace project ever was the European Union. And I'm not sure you'll see anything similar globally. If you look back at the history of Europe, prior to 1945, if you go back before that, almost every 25, 30 years, you have wars right across the continent. The continent is riven by conflict. Not only the First and the Second World Wars. Go back to the 1870s. If you go up to the Siga soil, the statue of the Golden Eagle just up from the Brandenburg Gate, it actually commemorates, as far as I remember, 3 victories. And the first one is over Denmark. And you kind of say, why were they fighting Denmark? That was Europe of the 19th century, constant conflict. So then you roll forward into 1945. Europe is in ruins, and then there was this agreement then to come together to put together coal and steel, because you needed coal and steel to fight a war. So therefore, you put together the means of fighting the war. You put them into a common pot, and France and Germany agreed to do that with the Benelux and Italy. 70 years onwards, 75 years onwards, then you then have this very successful, and people will criticise the European Union undoubtedly, but it's a remarkably successful when you look at where it came from and what it was all about at the beginning. Unfortunately, at the same time as we joined, just shortly before we joined the European Union, conflict broke out in Northern Ireland in 1968. There was a civil rights protest. There was very strong. It was very strong discrimination against nationalists. They were mainly Catholic families, as regards housing, and a dispute arose over housing. They wouldn't give houses. The local government wouldn't give housing to the local Catholic families. A civil rights march started. The army, the police, the paramilitary police force opened fire in the protest march, and the thing got out of control. And then 30 years later, you have 3,532 people were killed in the conflict. Where does Europe come into this as well? If you look at the darkest parts, and this is about conflict resolution and cultural diplomacy, during the darkest time of the conflicts, European councils were taking place in Brussels, and the Irish Taoiseach and the British Prime Minister attended them, representing their 2 countries. And it became a little bit of a safe space to have dialogue, because very difficult to have dialogue. 2 governments meeting together, there's agendas, there's press conference afterwards. There's a lot of questions about what exactly is happening. But in terms of confidence building, these were important, these short bilateral meetings in Brussels. Then we rolled forward to 1996, and we started talks a few times before that, but it wasn't successful. 96, and then 1998, you have the Good Friday Belfast Agreement. And then the agreement was put to referendum in both jurisdictions, in Ireland and Northern Ireland, and overwhelmingly supported in both. So therefore, on the island of Ireland today, we have a whole generation of people who've grown up in peace. People your age who've grown up in peace, whereas their parents and their older siblings certainly didn't. You also have that here in Germany. You have a whole generation of people who have grown up since the Berlin Wall, who have been able to go shopping, who have been able to cross the line. There is no line anymore. That's the beauty of it. And also on the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, I can remember going up there as a younger person, very heavily fortified, barbed wire, watchtowers, army, British soldiers everywhere, very, very intimidating, and certainly, kind of a hostile environment. And thankfully that's all gone. When you drive from Ireland to Northern Ireland today, the only thing you notice is the road surface is a little bit different on both sides. That's it. And the signs, the speed signs are different. Kilometres in Ireland, miles in Northern Ireland. So that's it really. So that's a remarkable achievement in terms of a peace process delivering. Of course, we have challenges, we have bumps along the way, but overall, it's delivering. So therefore, what can we say in terms of our experience about reconciliation? Reconciliation it has to be the product of an agreement, and difficult compromises have to be made. And this is one of the things that became obvious during the process, in terms of both sides had to move. We had to move, and Northern Ireland had to move. We actually we took provisions out of our constitution about unification, and we changed our constitution, because our original constitution, written in 1937, said we own the whole island, but we only have jurisdiction over 26 counties and not 6. So therefore, we actually changed the constitution to say that unification can only be achieved by consent, and that's the key phrasing going forward when we talk about unification. But coming together through a peace process requires generosity of spirit, and it requires trust above all else. And this was one of the things which we spent a lot of time at a local community level trying to build trust. German reunification is a little bit different. German reunification, there'll be greater scholars than I on German reunification, but if you look back at the press conference when the official was asked about when can we go to West Germany, and he says ab sofort, with immediate effect. He wasn't briefed properly. The lines perhaps weren't that clear. I don't think they meant entirely we're tearing down the wall tonight, but that's what happened, thankfully. And, one could argue that reunification continues to this very day in Germany and in Ireland. There are different communities coming together. There are different traditions. There are different processes as well. Even still in Germany, there are different old age pension arrangements for the former Eastern states. So therefore, when I talk about reconciliation, when I talk about coming together, it's about compromise. Don't misunderstand that, though, that in some ways that I'm equating that to Ukraine, because I know that's the other issue that you're looking at today. I'm absolutely not saying that Ukraine should reconcile or negotiate with the architects of war, which is a totally different process. I'm talking about reconciliation among two peoples within the same country. One of the things we're often asked to speak to different groups, to different parties involved in reconciliation, about our experience and about our understanding of how a process works, which we willingly do. But we would say that every context is different, and every peace process is different. I remember someone involved in the Cypriot peace talks saying to me once, we read the Good Friday Agreement, and there's ambiguities in it. And I said, yeah, of course there's ambiguity. There has to be ambiguities in sometimes in a peace agreement, because you just can't get agreement. And then what we did was we set up a framework to deal with these, and the ambiguities inevitably arise along the road, and you deal with them as you come up. Some things are just too hard to get agreement on the day, and sometimes you have to just put them into a process. I might just say about kind of the a few words, because it may be of interest to you in terms of Brexit, the impact of Brexit on the peace process, and we have found this to be quite challenging. Brexit, it's a sovereign decision which the British people are absolutely entitled to make, and they made a decision to leave the European Union. It's a momentous decision, at a time of kind of, and we can see it now, like the challenges around Western unity. But the British decided to leave, and that's their decision. We would prefer they hadn't left. But it has brought about some remarkable kind of challenges, and particularly in Northern Ireland, and this is where you get challenges to the peace process. We set out our objectives at the beginning of the Brexit process, that we had two objectives: to protect the EU's single market, which is a very valuable commodity, to be allowed to trade within Europe with no tariffs, no non-tariff barriers either. If you make something in Germany, you can sell it anywhere in Europe. Anyone with a European passport can live anywhere they like or work anywhere they like in Europe. But if you decide to leave the club, you lose those rights. So that's one element. But then the second thing we were clear about is protecting the peace process. Because we have no border. As I said, like if you drive from Ireland to Northern Ireland, the road surface changes a little bit. The road signs change, but that's it. You can drive over and back. There's no British Army watchtowers anymore, and we're absolutely not going back to that. So the concern we had was that if the British diverged very far from European norms, we would have challenges about protecting the single market, and putting a border back up would recreate a conflict, we believe. So that's why we're adamant that it isn't going to happen. And one of the really interesting elements in terms of kind of working together, the European Union sometimes criticises itself for not being a strong political bloc. There's sometimes going to be, member states protecting interests, but in Brexit, the 27 member states stuck rigidly together, and that I think it's been a very good exercise in terms of working together. Just moving into the broader European space today, and particularly the conflict in Ukraine. Just to be very clear, our guiding principle as a country is support for international law and respect for territorial integrity and sovereignty. And this is a fundamental difference between internal conflicts. At the moment, it would seem that President Putin is determined to do quite the opposite. There's no respect for territorial integrity. It's open warfare in a sense on Ukraine. We have been vocal. We're an elected member of the UN Security Council up until the end of December this year. So we have been pushing for condemnation of Russia on its violations of international law. We've also been clear in our condemnation of the declaration of the Russian Federation on the 30th of September that they had illegally annexed part of the territory of Ukraine. In particular, the resolution of the General Assembly on the 12th of October was a significant step, and the war and illegal occupation is not just a Western concern, but it's an assault on the very principle of the UN Charter, which concerns everybody. One area that we, and I think all members, all countries have, is concern around the threat of nuclear weapons, never mind their use. Simply making threats around nuclear weapons is incendiary and very, very dangerous. We've condemned this unequivocally. Any nuclear threats, in a sense, we will always condemn, whether they're explicit or implicit, and irrespective of the circumstances. Ireland is military neutral, and this goes back to our history. It goes back to the Second World War in a sense, but we haven't been politically neutral in response to Russia's aggression against Ukraine. We've been very clear in terms of kind of doing what we can in terms of supporting the people of Ukraine. We contribute to the EU fund, which is providing both lethal and non-lethal hardware to Ukraine. We don't contribute towards lethal. We only contribute towards non-lethal support around hospitals, field hospitals, medical supplies, issues like that. Also, as well, it's been interesting from the broader geopolitical. If you look what's happened in Europe, it's fair to say that the last 10 years or so there has been a less than enthusiastic response around enlargement. We have quite a number of countries wanting to join the European Union. If you look across Southeast Asia, you have the former Yugoslavia, and you have quite a number of countries who want to join. And then there's been an ongoing issue around Turkey. But what's really been interesting, I think, is the way support for Ukraine and then Georgia and Moldova, and I think it has changed the enlargement game. I think enlargement is back on the table again, and we will see enlargement, I think, over the coming years. coming from a situation where there was more or less a lock against enlargement for the last 10 to 15 years. Clear signals have been sent to Ukraine about their place in Europe, the European family. We've supported this from the beginning, and we're ready to provide encouragement and support, in fact, for Ukraine's bid for EU membership. I'm just conscious, I'm just kind of gone on a little bit. I think in terms of, I'll just kind of wrap it up a little bit in terms of just around Ukraine, just to say that, in a sense, it's appalling what's going on. We're very clear in our condemnation of that, as is the rest of Europe. And I suppose there will be challenges going into the winter now, notably around kind of civilian infrastructure, because this seems to be the Russian tactic now of destroying civilian infrastructure. So we will have fairly harrowing pictures, I think, coming out of Kyiv in terms of people with no access to electricity, water, and sanitation. Hopefully not, but it would seem that that's the direction it's going. We will continue to support Ukraine. We will extend the European hand to them when the time comes, when the actual, what the next stage will be, kind of talks will open in terms of actual accession. What's called the acquis, the European acquis. There are 40, I think it's 45 chapters. I can't remember the exact number, but you have to satisfy the criteria in those chapters. And we will be there in terms of supporting Ukraine and helping them along the road. Just to thank you for the invitation here today to conclude. I think it's great work that you do in terms of, I suppose, cultural diplomacy is very broad. It's not just about culture. It's about equipping you. It's about giving you the methodology to see the broader picture, the broader geostrategic picture in the world today. We sometimes operate. We've certain old Irish sayings which you all have in your own country. We've one which translates as a good friend is a friend in hardship, and we certainly see that as Ukraine today. So just my sincere thanks to you, Mark, to the Academy for the invitation, and very happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency Ambassador O'Brien, and we'd be most pleased to receive questions, comments, as always. Just raise your hand, and if you could briefly introduce yourself. Who would like to go first? Don't be shy.
It's a long afternoon.
Any questions or comments? As I said,
Yeah.
it's different opinions, also hearing this and debates. Yes, okay, please. If you could go to the microphone, I'll say. Maybe that's discouraging people from asking questions. They have to move back to the microphone. Okay.
Lowell Ewart from Canada. Thank you very much for your presentation. Quick question about criminal accountability. Does international criminal accountability or accountability have to play in terms of the approach that you look to for peace in Europe?
Yeah, no, thanks very much. I must say it's a really interesting and challenging question, because we've had to work with this in the context of Northern Ireland, and I think really big questions will have to be addressed. Inevitably all conflicts come to an end, and Ukraine will come to an end sometime. The sooner the better, and then there will be very real questions about accountability. It's a tricky one. In the Northern Ireland peace process, there were real issues around this as well, and one of the problems at the moment, one of the tensions we have, the British government, is the last British government, two British governments ago, the Johnson government, proposed an amnesty in a sense for all British military personnel, absolving them of all crimes, and everybody in Northern Ireland on both sides of the divide and the Irish government is opposed to this. Because you end up, what happened was, as part of the peace agreement, there was an amnesty devised in that for people, within certain categories and around certain time periods. And once you go outside that, it becomes very difficult to manage. But I think you're right. I think we'll have a real challenge going, coming out of the Ukrainian conflict. There will be some form of agreement, peace agreement, or withdrawal by the Russians, or whatever happens. But it's another day's work trying to get people in front of the International Criminal Court in The Hague. But that being said, I wouldn't be despondent about it, because if you look at sometimes the work of the ICC, they have reached back quite a period. But it will be an interesting one, to say the least. If we have been involved, and other member states have cited Russia already, so the ICC is going to have to address these issues. But it's a difficult one, without a doubt. But that doesn't mean there should be impunity. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Other questions, comments? Because if not, I'll leave throw one in there, just from a cultural diplomacy point of view. Ireland, as you mentioned, of course, is a country that has experience also with violence and with conflict. How important is cultural diplomacy, in your opinion? Now, when we talk about Russia, Ukraine, it seems daunting. What can cultural diplomacy do? And we have the threat of nuclear weapons. But maybe you have a success story or a best practice from Ireland where cultural diplomacy made a difference or had an impact.
Yeah, well, what I would say was I think we use cultural diplomacy quite effectively. Two things about it: it's a safe space, and you can cooperate with others on this. And we've done it with going back quite a number of years when relations with the UK were very strained. We could still find space, and that's the beauty perhaps of cultural diplomacy. I think it's a safe space to operate in. You can also use it to advance dialogue, but simply by creating a space, because unless culture is a very overt and very nationalistic, most cultural space it's relatively safe, and most people can go into that zone. So you can invite, and we would have worked with the British and some of these areas when politically things were very difficult between us. I think it's a good way as well of kind of getting your message out. We use cultural diplomacy shamelessly, I have to confess. For example, James Joyce's Ulysses. We've created a whole kind of a whole event space around kind of the middle of June that we own Ulysses. St. Patrick's Day is the best example we have, particularly in the States and Canada. And even in places like Germany, the biggest parade in mainland Europe is in Munich on St. Patrick's Day. Hasn't happened for the last 3 years, of course, but it will be back next March. So it gives you a space to actually to advance your objectives. The diplomacy is generally split into political, economic, and cultural, and for good reason, because you can use the cultural element quite ruthlessly. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. Positively, I mean it. That like Dracula is another one, which Dracula is it's an Irish author. So, for example, I'm going tonight to a screening. We've resurrected the old Nosferatu film, and we've commissioned a music score to go with it. So these are ways, for example, Riverdance, that kind of famous Irish kind of dance group. They're here in February and March, touring all around Germany. We will use them as an embassy. Like, we will invite the local Oberbürgermeister or Minister President to the event. So from that point of view, it's I think it's quite a powerful weapon. And it's kind of a nice space to bring people into, and then you say, oh, by the way, and then you do your business. So I'll leave you with that maybe, and thanks very much indeed for the invitation. Thank you.